volunteer runs, didn't have our own 501c3s, didn't have our structures together. And we decided that if we bonded together and formed our own kind of like trade association, we could perhaps do collectively what we couldn't do individually, which is strengthen each other, work together, coordinate our advocacy, work to discover and what we needed researched about the situation in communities of color. And so we formed SisterSong. Now, we were named SisterSong by one of our members who does have full-blown AIDS, and her name is Juanita Williams, and we love the way Juanita said, we are all singing the same song, but we're not singing it in harmony. We need to be SisterSong. And it just caught on, and that's how we are. Well, now SisterSong, nearly 10 years later, is 76 women of color and allied organizations who work on reproductive health issues, and we run the gamut. And you can find out more about SisterSong on our website, www.sistersong.net. Now, on the question of reproductive justice, as women of color, we've always problematized the concept of individual rights and choice and privacy, because we're representing communities that don't have a lot of choices.
Yes.
Communities that don't have a lot of privacy because we are heavily monitored and heavily policed and heavily interfered with by the government. And we never could conceive of ourselves as individuals outside of the context of our communities, because what happens to our communities happens to us. Often the attempt is made to control our communities through the wombs of women of color. And so we always felt that that constitutionally based privacy framework that the pro-choice movement uses may work for some women who do have choices, but it doesn't work as well for women who have circumscribed choices. And so we coined the term in 1994, the term reproductive justice, and I think it came about because we were just returning from the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, Egypt, which took place in September of 94. And in November of 94, we were at this big pro-choice conference in Chicago. And at the time, we were trying to end the isolation of abortion from other social justice issues. And so what we did was marry reproductive rights to social justice and come up with the term reproductive justice. Now, we've since infused it with a lot of other meanings, because what we recognized in Cairo is that women around the world use the human rights framework as a way for arguing for the protection of women's lives and their communities and their families. As a matter of fact, the phrase they use is women's rights or human rights. But you don't hear a lot of that discourse here in the United States. And so we wanted to look at how we could bring Cairo home, how we could bring human rights home. And so we started talking about, well, what are human rights, and going through the 8 categories: civil, political, economic, social, cultural, environmental, development, and sexual.
Very nice.
Thank God I didn't forget any of them. And saying, well, every time a woman is pregnant, she's not just thinking about whether or not to have the baby. She's thinking about whether or not she's going to get fired from her job if she requires maternity leave, whether or not she's going to get beaten if she tells her partner she's pregnant. Does she have health care? Does she have a bedroom to put that child in? Does that child have a school? You know, all of these issues are the complex things women think about when they miss a cycle. And that's all it takes is a missed cycle. We don't even have to know we're pregnant yet. And we start thinking that way. And all of those are human rights issues. They're way beyond whether or not to keep the baby. If you don't have health care or earn a living wage, that's an economic human rights or a social human rights issue. If you're worrying about safety or freedom from violence against women, that's a civil rights issue. And so we looked at the complex lives women really live and started to think about reproductive justice as a human rights-based way of keeping our rights together. And that's the reason our book is called Undivided Rights. It's a way of keeping all of our rights together. Then finally, we analyzed that there's a relationship between individual human rights, the right of a woman to determine her own reproductive destiny, and the reproductive destiny of that entire community. So if you're in the African American community that lacks overall access to health care,
Yes.
well, obviously your reproductive options are much more limited than if you're in a community where most people have jobs and they have health care provided by their employers and stuff. And so the ability of any woman or man, for that matter, to determine their own reproductive destiny is always related to what's going on in their community. And so in a human rights way, we talk about the relationship between individual human rights and group or collective human rights. And so that's the reproductive justice framework. Now on bridging. We feel that this is new theory being offered by women of color. It is intersectional theory in the classic intersectional mode. I mean, Audre Lorde talked about intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw talks about intersectionality, saying that a woman, every human being is raced, has a class, has a gender, and you can't separate those dimensions of any human being when you're talking about building a movement to address their human needs. And I always use the Shirley Chisholm quote when I talk about intersectionality because it's the best way to explain it. When she was asked why does she work on behalf of the pro-choice movement, Shirley Chisholm said, well, I never could figure out whether I was born black or female first. I'm like, yeah, that gets it. You're born black, you're born female, you're born to a certain class, you're born, either of immigrant or native-born parents. You have all of these complex things. And that's intersectionality, that all of these things are happening in your life simultaneously, not additive, because you weren't born black and turned female. No, it's all at the same time. So we added intersectional theory to reproductive rights work and came up with reproductive justice. Every woman is intersectional, not just women of color. It's just a lot of times white women don't think of themselves as having a race or having a class.
The blindness of whiteness.
Yes, that blindness. But we feel that intersectional theory works for everybody because in the crudest way I can think, I am totally convinced that the powers to be have different destinies in mind for different women based on their race and class. That there is a overwhelming pressure being placed on white women to reproduce. And that pressure is created by eliminating access to abortion, by making quality sex education totally unavailable, and instead offering abstinence education, which everybody knows does not work. And at the same time, if you're a woman of color, every obstacle in the world is put in the way of your choosing to have a child and to parent the children that you have. And so you have welfare reform that tells women how many children they can't have. You have sterilization abuse. You have the dumping of unsafe contraceptives in our community. And so to bridge that race and class divide, first of all of us need to understand that we are raced and that we are classed, and beyond the fact that we do recognize that we are gendered. And once we begin to look at that, then we'll see that we have to build movement that is inclusive of everybody, because no one's any more human than anybody else. And we have to do the work that we do in a way that doesn't injure or violate the human rights of anybody else. And I think that's the way we're going to bridge the race and class divide in the women's movement. But it starts with white women realizing that they have both race and class issues.
Couldn't agree more.
So speaking of white women,